Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more in general about how to write a discussion section. And typically, a scientific paper takes on this hourglass format. So when I say an hourglass, or sometimes it's called a martini glass, you can see that it starts with the introduction that has a very sort of general, broad theme, boiling down to a very specific question that you're asking. Then you have the sort of neck of the martini or hourglass that includes the methods and results that are very sort of specific to your study and what you found. And then you've got the discussion section that once again sort of starts with the specific and then works out to the general. So it's sort of the opposite of the introduction, where you start with some very specific parts of your findings and work your way out to sort of the broader implications of your findings. So let's break this discussion down a little bit more and look at the sort of three major components that make up your discussion, going from the specific to the more broad or general portions. So the first part is the most specific part, and that is your answer. Essentially, you're explicitly addressing the specific question, hypothesis, or goal of your study, and that should be the first part of your discussion. The second part is the specific contextualization. So this is a little bit specific, but it's a little bit broad because what you're doing is comparing your specific results to those of other studies. So what have other studies found and how do those compare? And so you're getting a little bit broader here because you're comparing your findings to those of others. And this is where you're going to incorporate those new scholarly papers that you found. And then lastly is the most general part, which is the broader contextualization. So this is when you're talking about the next steps of the study and the broader implications of your findings for either society in general or the sort of field that you're studying in general. So let's break down each of these sections and just talk about some do's and don'ts. So when we're talking about this first specific answer question, things that you do want to do, make sure you restate the question, goal, and hypothesis that your study aimed to address. But you want to avoid reiterating all of your intro and background information related to that question, goal, or aim. So you want to be concise and succinct here. You've already written your intro. You don't need to write it all over again. You want to make sure that you explicitly state the answer to your question, hypothesis, or study goal or aim. Okay, so make sure that you say what you found and what your sort of answer was, so to speak. But you want to avoid overgeneralization and overstating the findings, your findings or their accuracy. So the reader shouldn't be able to look at it and say, like, that is not what the results say at all. So make sure you're not overstating your findings. And then briefly explain how your results support your interpretation. Okay, so you want to talk about your results a little bit and probably talk about the one or two really main findings that really back up why you're saying you got the answer that you did, but you want to avoid recapitulating all of your results or adding any new results. So when I say recapitulate, that basically means this shouldn't be going through every single result you found all over again. You've already written the results section. You don't need to write the results section again. So don't recapitulate all of your results. And also, you shouldn't be adding any new results. So make sure you're not saying anything new that was not already included in your results section. If you find yourself doing that, you should be adding that into your results section. Okay, the next part, the specific contextualization part, where you're comparing your results to those of other studies. Things that you want to do, make sure you use scholarly literature, okay? So these should be new articles that are from a scholarly literature database and scholarly sources and journals, okay? Avoid using crap or something that doesn't pass the crap test, okay? Make sure you read and review what others found. So don't just find a paper that's like, that title looks like it works and here's one sentence that I need to have. Try to actually read those papers, see what their findings are, so that you can actually create that contextualization in your brain and tie it in with what they found to what you found, okay? But try to avoid finding papers that are not relevant or related to your findings. And if you're struggling with finding papers that are related to your findings, talk to your instructor about that. You want to make sure you explain how your findings either agree or disagree with previous studies, okay? So did previous studies, let's say you looked at sushi, did those previous studies find a high degree of mislabeling of sushi? Did you also find that high degree of mislabeling? And did they agree that you found the similar amounts of mislabeling in the species or the type of sushi that you looked at? But avoid mischaracterizing or adding any new results, okay? So if your things aren't aligning, try not to overgeneralize and make sure that you're not talking about any new results or new things that you hadn't discussed before previously in your results. And if you did, or find yourself doing that, go in, add those back to your results. Lastly, make sure you highlight any of your findings that are either confusing or paradoxical, okay? So if you're finding something that's just like, this is not what we would have predicted at all, or it's really strange that we found this while these other studies have found that, and that can be either in comparison to other people's studies or even within your own results that are sort of confusing or paradoxical. Try to explain what those confusing things were and why you think you might have found them. But when you're doing that, make sure you avoid overly speculating on the reasons why you found a confusing result. So stick to what do you know from your analyses, and you can defend with citations. Don't just be sort of grasping at straws trying to explain a weird finding. Okay, and lastly, the broader contextualization things that you want to do. Make sure you discuss any new questions or future studies that logically follow from your findings, okay? But what I want people to avoid doing, what we often see people doing, is saying, well, we need to go out and collect a bunch more samples. And of course you need to collect more samples. That's something that no matter what study you do, no matter where you are, it'd always be good to go out and collect more data. And so if you're gonna say collect more samples, please be very specific about how many samples you need. Please be very specific about the types of samples you need and how those samples that you decide to collect logically follow from the findings that you initially found in this study, okay? Please discuss the practical applications of your work or how your findings inform broader aspects of your field of study, okay? So how would someone that's not necessarily a scientist studying this apply your findings? Or how might other people that are scientists that are in this field apply your findings to inform what they're working on? But once again, as always, you want to avoid overgeneralizing or overstating the usefulness, value, or applications or implications of your finding. Okay, so remember at this point, we've only collected a few samples, so you don't want to overgeneralize and say that your findings implicate what everyone's going to find across all of planet Earth. And lastly, you want to make sure that you include a final paragraph that summarizes the major findings of your study and its place in the larger scientific record, okay? So contextualize this. This is a part that students often forget to include, so please just make sure you include this final summary paragraph. And as before, make sure you don't overgeneralize, overstate the implications of your findings. Okay, the last thing that I want to say to you guys is everyone should be really proud of yourselves. You've developed and executed a scientific study, and you've actually created new real data. You guys are doing real science, and this is something that's a very rare thing for students in introductory courses to get to do, and it's a very difficult thing to do, and I hope you guys have recognized the challenges that you faced, but also are proud of yourselves for actually developing and executing a scientific study. Congratulations.